next question will be first addressed to Dean Scontras. Recently, the United States Supreme Court ruled that an identification card was allowable in order to prove one's identity before voting. Do you believe that this is a form of a poll tax, and do you believe that proving one's identity will stop voter fraud?
I've had the good fortune of taking constitutional law twice. Okay, I did pass it both times, right? So I am a proud constitutional law student. I have reverence for the Constitution, and I have reverence for the Supreme Court. So your question is already inherently answered to some degree. I've had this debate now with the Democrats several times. It's if Congress passes a piece of legislation, they pass it, and if somebody takes it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upholds it as being constitutional, the answer to your question is Dean Scontras cannot do anything in the United States Congress to overturn the Supreme Court, short of what Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to do in '94, where he tried to stack the court. I can't do that. But I will tell you from a voter perspective, hey look, there was an issue here in Maine this year that I led the state on, when it was illegals coming into the state to get licenses. Everybody watched that episode of the Baldacci Show? Right? 3 years ago, he signed an executive order to allow illegals to come into the state and get licenses. What do you need to go vote? Licenses, right? I went to go see a Korean War vet down in Kennebunk, and he told me, meanwhile this was all going on, he said, I went down to register to vote, and I don't have a license. They wouldn't let me register to vote. So I think there you have it. It's got to be a valid form of ID, and if the Constitution upholds it, that's good. But if we have governors in place, like Governor John Baldacci, that's giving away licenses to whoever comes in the front door, we've got another problem. So not only as your congressman, when you have somebody who has an implicit and reverent or knowledge of the Constitution and reverence for the Supreme Court, you'll have somebody come home to the state and say, I know I'm in the United States Congress, but what John Baldacci is not, what he's doing is not good. And I'm glad I did that. And I wrote letters to the editor, and I had over 1,200 people sign my petition to have the governor rescind his executive order. Now, we didn't get what he wanted, but did you guys watch a couple weeks ago, the last episode of the Baldacci Show? He required residency requirements. So I think the thing to look at is who's going to lead on these issues? Who's going to speak up? Who's going to use the bully pulpit when it's an issue of values and things you know about in the Constitution and licenses? Dean Scontras, I've already done it here in the state when it came for illegals getting driver's license. I spoke up about it. I helped change the policy, but I'm going to continue to fight it because I'm not going to be satisfied until in Maine they require a valid Social Security number. Thank you.
I think the question was, do we consider this a form of poll tax? And I think that if the federal government mandates a federal ID, then they're going to have to pay for it, so everyone can have it, or they shouldn't be mandated. Now, I'm not a fan of the federal ID. I don't think the government needs any more information on you than it already has. I think that, Dean is right. Once a law court or the Supreme Court decides, obviously it becomes the law of the land unless it is somehow overturned. But I think what we need to focus on here is that, do you want the federal government to be issuing federal IDs? I happen to believe that the driver's license is, in effect, a federal ID because it's valid in all 50 states. And what we need to do, in terms of the driver's license, is to provide proof positive that you are, in fact, a citizen when you apply for a driver's license. You can produce your birth certificate, you can produce a passport, you can produce a green card, if that is the case. So, in answer to your question, I'm not a fan of the federal ID, don't think it's a good idea, don't want the government having any more information on me or you than they already have. And I think that if the government does mandate a federal ID, then it's the government's responsibility to pay for that federal ID, so it does not, in fact, become a form of a poll tax. So thank you.